take another look at the 2028 electoral map with JD Vance versus AOC for this matchup. Looking at my hypothetical map for the election, we can see that JD Vance does end up winning the Electoral College in this scenario in a very interesting election. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, yes, Vance does improve in a lot of the rural areas across the country. He does considerably better in some places, including Florida and Texas, where he does gain quite a significant amount of support with either gaining some votes from the previous elections or AOC dropping off in votes in some places. But overall, he ends up doing pretty well in the Electoral College in this map. We can see that Utah, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas, Oklahoma, Kansas is still in, this safe column, but it does get a point closer from the last election. And Nebraska is only a 16-point win, whereas opposed to a 20-point win last time. So that actually puts the first congressional district under a 12-point victory in this hypothetical scenario. Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, West Virginia, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, as well as South Carolina, Florida, Texas, and Alaska are all in the safe column. And we clearly see here that this means second congressional district would also be in that safe column as of right now. Looking at the safe Democrat states, California, Washington, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Maryland, including Hawaii and DC, would be all of the states that fall into this safe category. This ends up giving AOC just 98 safe Electoral College votes to JD Vance's 218 safe Electoral College votes. We can clearly see here that he ends up getting about 78 million votes to the Democrats' 71 million votes in this election cycle, with him even getting over 50% of the national popular vote, and AOC getting about 46% of the national popular vote, winning the popular vote by 4.5 points in this hypothetical scenario. He gains in a lot of the rural areas, even improves in suburban and some minority areas, but does lose ground in college-educated areas. He also loses ground in areas that are plus 65 years old, and even with 18 to 34-year-old voters, he actually does do a couple points worse with that demographic, which is why you see states like Virginia and Minnesota actually shift to the left from 2024, while some other places continue to move in the Republican direction. Looking at the likely states for JD Vance, Arizona and Nevada fall into this column at pretty big margins. So JD Vance actually does better in Nevada and Arizona than he does against Gavin Newsom. If we were to look here, Maricopa ends up being a 10-point win for him in this election cycle, where he basically ends up improving from Trump's margin by roughly 7 points. So that's a massive overperformance in Maricopa. And in Clark County, Harris won it by 2.5 points. Here, Vance is winning it by 2.5 points. And we can even see in Washoe County, he's winning that by 4. Harris won it by 1 point. And in a lot of the rural areas, Vance gains ever so slightly in some of the counties. For example, the most northeastern county, Elko County, Trump won by 56.5 points. In this election, he's winning it by 58.5. So some slight movements in his direction do cause the state to be a Republican titanium in this election. And Arizona is a humongous margin as well. North Carolina falls into the likely column at just above 6 points. So it's a 6.2 percentage point margin, which is a 3-point shift away from the 2024 margin. We can clearly see that he's doing very well in some of these northeastern counties and improves massively in some of the western parts of the state. So that is how you end up getting those likely states for Vance in this cycle. As for the Democrat, we have Oregon and Colorado. We have Connecticut is safe. Rhode Island is likely. Delaware, I believe, is also in the likely column. In this one, just below the 12-point threshold. And Rhode Island actually falls to just a 9-point win as opposed to the 14-point win from the last election. So the state actually ends up moving significantly to the right, which is very, very interesting. we clearly see here that with the, and then means Nebraska's first is also going to be in the likely column. But other than that, those are all of the likely and safe states for both of the candidates. Oh, well, we got to include New York there. I almost forgot New York is in that likely column, including Virginia and Minnesota. So here's the thing. Virginia ends up shifting 2 points away from Republicans compared to 2024. And this is mostly because of the young voter kind of shifting towards AOC, and some of those college educated voters do shift to her like a tiny bit. We can clearly see here Harris won it by 5.8%. Here, AOC's winning it by 7.5%. And we see here that clearly Minnesota is a 6.3 percentage point margin, which is a 2-point shift away from Trump's performance in the state when he lost it by 4.2%. Nebraska's second will probably also be in that likely Democratic column as well. And so that puts these states in the competitive column. And yes, even Illinois is considered competitive due to the very low African American turnout that you would see in this election, hence why Georgia would end up being a pretty decent margin for Vance. He actually improves in the state by 2 points compared to Trump, whereas against Newsom, he does slightly worse than Trump in the state. This is mostly because a lot of the black voters wouldn't show up for AOC, in my opinion. They would shift away towards Vance, but the turnout with those voters would be significantly lower than most presidential elections. So Vance ends up winning the state of Georgia by 4.6%. He wins Fayette County by 5.5 points. Cobb County, all of these like suburban Democratic counties are a lot closer than their 2024 counterparts. And you even see here, like, for example, like, you know, all of these like counties that are somewhat competitive, they flip to Trump by a pretty decent amount. Even Duval moves away from AOC, which kind of coincides with the movement in Georgia going slightly towards the Republican Party. Georgia statewide, as well as Duval, kind of have like a correlation amongst themselves. So that is something interesting to note. In Virginia, you clearly see that there are legit counties here that you like clearly see. It's like bright as day where Vance does better, but then Harris gains in like some of them. So like if we were to go to Virginia, for example, Chesterfield is Harris +9. If we were going to get a county map here, it's AOC +12. Like even Montgomery County here, it's like literally, we clearly see this county right here is like basically AOC +5. Here it's Trump +7.5. So like clearly there are like these humongous shifts away from Republicans, and we even see like Essex County, Vance +8.5. Here it's Trump +7.7, and Virginia Beach gets bluer. Chesapeake County also becomes like there's a lot of shifts that occur on the map that are really interesting for Virginia. Even like you definitely have some parts of Virginia that end up moving significantly in different places and cause the state to end up moving into the Democratic column there. So some of the suburbs kind of move left, while some of the black turnout areas end up becoming more favorable towards Vance. And then we clearly see that in New Mexico, I mean, Vance is still losing it by 3 points. He doesn't get as much turnout against AOC as he would against Newsom in this. But he does technically perform better in the state than he would against Newsom by just like a tad bit, but it still end up 2 points over in the lean column. Illinois is really interesting because you clearly would see like the city area, Cook County is D +36. Harris won this county, give or take, by 41. So again, that's a huge shift. And on top of that, all of these like surrounding suburban counties actually end up flipping into JD Vance's column by a pretty significant amount. And you see he improves in like the rural areas quite a bit. He almost ends up flipping Peoria County. McLean is like really, really close. So that is also really interesting to take note of as well. But overall, the state of Illinois ends up shifting massively into his column there. Looking at the other states here, New Jersey is a 2.9 percentage point win. Again, we see that, Vance actually ends up winning Bergen and Morris County, and he wins Passaic by 6 points and even holds the margins in like Cumberland and Atlantic. But, some of these Democratic the Democratic counties still hold strong. So that's why you still see a pretty decent performance for AOC in New Jersey. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, she's getting killed in Pennsylvania. 5.5 point loss there, 400,000 vote difference in New Jersey. It's a disaster for AOC in that state. And even like Wisconsin, a 2-point loss in Wisconsin. Again, AOC's Rust Belt support would be very iffy, especially in a place like Wisconsin. She does hold center in Dauphin County, and she does lose some of the gains in Philadelphia. Like if you actually look at Philadelphia, she loses like 2 points from Harris and continues to lose from Biden. But we clearly see these suburban areas here, like Bucks County is a 3-point win. Northampton is a 6-point win. Even Lackawanna County ends up flipping away from Harris, from AOC's margin. So that is pretty crazy. And Center County ends up actually becoming more Democrat than it was in the last election, which is interesting given the young population probably shifting away towards Vance. And Erie County ends up being R+5. So, just really crazy margins in some of these places. And you do have really big shifts in the rural areas towards Vance as well. So that would explain why you would see, these shifts occur. And in Wisconsin, the upper counties, these northwestern counties, they continue to shift Republican. Sawyer County obviously ends up, moving to the right from the last election by a little bit. However, we even see Vernon County, Trump gains there. Although in La Crosse and Eau Claire County, these actually get more Democrat than the previous election, which is interesting. So AOC gains there. She even actually does better than Harris does in Milwaukee and in Dane. So she actually improves from Harris in those places. But we see that Vance in some of these suburban counties actually ends up doing a bit better than her, and even actually almost flips Door County in his column, and he even wins Columbia County by 7.5 points, which is an insane accomplishment. And Portage basically stays the same from the last election. Iowa County, continues to be Democrat, but they do end up getting significantly closer. So, AOC does better in some of the city and suburban areas, but Vance just gains huge numbers in some of the, rural areas, which does help him out statewide. And then in Michigan, you actually see that she actually performs slightly better here, mainly because Vance's turnout would dip in the state. It's not really so much that AOC would do great here. It's more so his turnout is dropping overall in the state. But it is kind of in the tilt margin. Maine would be really, really close. And then New Hampshire ends up flipping into Vance's column ever so slightly. It's a really, really close map, but he does narrowly end up picking off the state by 0.3 percentage points. In Michigan, you do see Grand Traverse is barely in Trump's column. He still won it in Vance's column. Trump still won it in 2024, but clearly this area up here is becoming more and more Democrat as time goes on. So that's why you see those shifts there. Wayne still gets closer, but Muskegon actually ends up, getting closer from 2024. Kent County is a little bit more Democratic, and Nice is also more Democrat than the last election. And even Saginaw County, ends up being a little bit closer. So some of these suburban areas shift towards AOC, but the city and more eastern and upper rural areas kind of shift towards Vance. So overall, she makes very minor gains in the state, but they're offset by some of the gains that Vance makes as well. And so in the final map, you end up getting Vance with 316 electoral college votes to AOC's 222 electoral college votes. So make sure to go ahead and hit the like button and to subscribe if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.